Darren Cole had been working as a janitor at Skytech Aerodynamics for just over 9 years. Every morning before the engineers clocked in and the machines roared to life, Darren was there pushing his mop across the vast, sterile hangar floors, his movements quiet and rhythmic like the ticking of a well-calibrated clock. He was a ghost in the background, a shadow in coveralls, invisible to the world of innovation around him. Skytech wasn't just any company. They were a powerhouse in the aerospace industry, responsible for developing cutting-edge jet propulsion. Systems and engine designs so advanced that even government agencies begged for contracts. And in the middle of all that high-stakes technology, Darren quietly swept the floors and emptied the bins, ignored, underestimated, and yet always present. What no one knew was that Darren had once dreamed of being an engineer. He had enrolled in a state university right out of high school, passionate about aerodynamics and fluid mechanics. But life had other plans. His mother fell sick, his father left. Bills piled up, and dreams crumbled under the weight of reality. He dropped out to support his family, taking any job he could. Eventually, he found stable work at Skytech, not in engineering, but in janitorial services. The irony wasn't lost on him, but Darren never stopped learning. He spent his breaks reading old aerospace manuals tossed in recycling bins. He scribbled equations on napkins, watched YouTube tutorials at night, and lingered near whiteboards. When no one was around, he had a near photographic memory, and over the years, he'd mentally assembled and disassembled every engine Skytech ever produced without touching a single wrench. Then came the day everything changed. Excitement. Skytech had been working on a top-secret prototype engine 143A Delta. It was worth over $2 million and was the heart of their next-generation supersonic aircraft. The engine had been in development for 5 years and was the talk of the industry. On the day of its first real performance test, a crowd gathered: engineers, investors, even government representatives. Everyone expected fireworks. Instead, they got smoke. The engine roared for a moment, then coughed violently before shutting down with a hiss of steam and sparks. Warnings flashed across the diagnostic screens. Technicians swarmed the machine like bees to a dying hive. The launch was canceled. Panic set in. Over the next 3 days, Skytech's best and brightest worked in shifts, trying to identify the issue. They ran simulations, replaced parts, updated firmware, even called in consultants from overseas. Each expert was more confident than the last and just as unsuccessful. Darren watched all of it, silently, his mop gliding slowly across the far side of the hangar. He wasn't supposed to be near the prototype, but the boundaries blurred when you carried a trash cart and wore a name tag no one cared to read. He overheard arguments about heat signatures, airflow, and misaligned magnetic oscillators. Engineers cursed under their breath. Coffee cups piled up. Sleep-deprived minds grew frantic. Late on the third night, the hangar finally quieted. The last of the engineers, a junior tech named Ravi, packed his laptop with a frustrated sigh and left. Only Darren remained, sweeping the same spot over and over, as if the floor might whisper the answer. He stood still, staring at engine 143, a Delta. It sat like a wounded beast, silent, cold, mysterious. Its sleek titanium housing still shimmered under the fluorescent lights, but it was useless unless it could breathe fire again. Darren walked over, cautiously. He didn't dare touch it at first, but he knew this machine. He had read every document about its design that had ever accidentally been thrown out. He had committed its blueprints to memory, and now, standing before it in silence, something clicked. He didn't see the engine the way the engineers did. They looked for data points, digital anomalies, complex variables. Darren saw patterns, small things that others missed. He noticed the discoloration near the left intake valve, the subtle warping in the thermal shielding, the faint hum that shouldn't have existed in standby mode. And then it hit him. The thermal coupler, a small component responsible for regulating heat transfer from the combustion chamber. If it was even slightly misaligned, it could create an unstable heat pattern, causing a cascade failure through the control system. He looked around. No one. Darren reached into his cart and pulled out a rusted multi-purpose wrench, a tool he had kept since high school shop class. He walked up to the engine's service hatch, opened it slowly, and peered inside. The coupler wasn't broken, but it was off just enough. The alignment tab sat 1 degree out of place. A trained engineer might have missed it, distracted by more complex systems. Asterisk hands trembling, Darren carefully adjusted the coupler until it clicked into place. He closed the hatch and took a step back. His heart pounded in his ears. Asterisk, he walked over to the auxiliary control panel. It was still powered. On in diagnostic mode, with a deep breath, Darren pressed the ignition sequence. The engine rumbled faintly. Lights blinked. For a moment, nothing happened. Then came the roar. Asterisk, the engine burst to life, smooth and powerful. The hangar shook. Lights flickered from the sudden energy surge. Heat waves shimmered off the floor, and Darren stood motionless. Eyes wide, mouth open, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, vindication. Asterisk, he scrambled to shut it down after a few seconds, fearing he might get fired for even trying. But the engine had spoken, it was alive. Asterisk, moments later, the alarms triggered by the noise brought back several employees. Security rushed in. Engineers followed. Within minutes, the hangar was crowded again, people shouting, confused, excited. They all stared at the engine, then at Darren, who stood near the control panel holding his mop like a sword. Asterisk, who started it. Someone barked, "I did." Darren replied softly. "You what?" came the reply from a senior engineer who looked half asleep. Asterisk, Darren cleared his throat. The thermal coupler was misaligned. "I fixed it." Asterisk, silence. Long, awkward silence. Asterisk, no offense, but you're the janitor, another engineer said. How would you even know what that is? Asterisk, Darren didn't answer right away. He just looked at the engine, then back at them. Asterisk, because I've been watching. Listening, learning for 9 years, he said. You all see wires and data streams? I see the whole picture. Asterisk, no one spoke, but something had changed in the air. Asterisk, that night, Darren was told to wait for upper management. His shift ended hours ago, but he didn't go home. He sat alone in the break room, hands still stained with grease, waiting to find out whether he was about to be fired or discovered. Morning came with blinding brightness and murmurs that filled the corridors like an approaching storm. By 7 a.m., the entire skytech facility was buzzing with rumors. Everyone had heard the impossible. The janitor brought engine 143A Delta back to life on his own. Half the engineers didn't believe it. The other half were too stunned to even form an opinion. Either way, the prototype was humming again, and Darren Cole, formerly invisible, had become the center of gravity in a place that had never looked his way before. Asterisk, Darren sat in the corner of the hangar staff lounge, still in his stained navy jumpsuit, sipping lukewarm coffee. He hadn't gone home. He hadn't slept. He just stared at his calloused hands and waited. Asterisk, at 7:23 a.m., a black town car pulled up outside the building. Asterisk, minutes later, Elliot Marsh, the CEO of skytech himself, man rarely seen outside boardrooms or air shows, walked into the hangar, flanked by his top executives. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed in a crisp charcoal suit, and carried the air of someone used to being the smartest man in the room. But today, he was here because someone had outsmarted everyone else. Asterisk, Marsh approached the crowd gathering around engine 143A Delta and looked it over silently. Then he turned to Darren. Asterisk, you're Darren Cole, he asked. Asterisk, Darren stood. Yes, sir. Asterisk, you're the janitor who fixed the most advanced propulsion system in aviation history. Asterisk, Darren hesitated. I guess I am. Asterisk, the room was tense. Some engineers shifted uncomfortably. A few avoided eye contact. Marsh studied Darren for a moment as though trying to peer beneath his skin. Asterisk, how did you do it? Marsh finally asked. Asterisk, Darren explained clearly, methodically about the misaligned thermal coupler, the ripple effect it caused on the heat regulation, the harmonic imbalance it introduced into the engine's startup sequence. As he spoke, the room grew quieter. A few engineers looked embarrassed. Others took mental notes. Marsh just listened to Asterisk when Darren finished. Marsh asked the million-dollar question. Asterisk, why didn't you speak up before? Asterisk, Darren took a breath. Because no one would have listened. Asterisk, the words landed like a slap. No one challenged it, because it was true. Asterisk, after a long pause, Marsh nodded and said, "Walk with me." Asterisk, they stepped outside onto the tarmac, where jets glittered in the morning sun. Marsh lit a cigar, offering one to Darren, who declined. Asterisk, you. Know what impresses me the most about what you did? Marsh said. It's not that you found the issue. It's not even that you fixed it. It's that you did it without fear. Everyone else was too worried about failing in front of me or the board. You had no stake, so you had nothing to lose. And somehow, that made you the most valuable man in this entire building. Asterisk, Darren stayed quiet. It felt surreal, like he was watching someone else live this moment. Asterisk, I'll be blunt, Marsh said. I can't let someone with your mind stay on a mop. That would be corporate malpractice. Asterisk, later that day, Marsh called an emergency press briefing. Reporters gathered from across the state. Headlines had already started circulating on tech blogs and aviation news sites. Janitor revives $2 million jet. Engine engineers baffled. The underdog genius of skytech, and from mop to mastermind. Asterisk cameras flashed as Darren, still in his jumpsuit, stood beside Marsh and a panel of stunned engineers. Asterisk, this man, Marsh declared, saved not just a prototype, but a project that represents the future of American aerospace. He reminded us that brilliance doesn't always wear a badge or sit in a lab coat. Sometimes, it pushes a mop down a quiet hallway. Effective immediately, Darren Cole is no longer a janitor. He is now lead systems analyst, and I'll personally oversee his integration into our R&D division. Asterisk, the room erupted. Some clapped, some just stared. Darren stood frozen, unsure whether to smile or run, but in that moment, he wasn't invisible anymore. Asterisk, the next few weeks were a blur. HR called. He got a new ID badge, a new desk, a salary package that made his head spin. And yet, Darren remained grounded. He didn't ask for perks. He didn't even ask for a new uniform. Asterisk, don't you want a lab coat or something? Someone in HR joked. Asterisk, I'll keep the jumpsuit, Darren said. It reminds me where I came from. Asterisk, his presence shook up the engineering department. At first, some of the senior staff treated him like a fluke accident. But over time, they realized Darren wasn't just lucky. He was brilliant in a way that couldn't be taught in a classroom. He thought like a machine, visually, intuitively. While others saw data, he saw systems breathing, whispering when something was wrong. Asterisk, one day, Revit, the junior engineer who'd left just before Darren fixed the engine, approached him. Asterisk, I owe you an apology, he said. I assumed you were just the janitor. That's okay. I wasn't trying to be seen. Asterisk, Ravi shook his head. Well, now the whole world sees you. Asterisk, despite the attention, Darren never sought the spotlight. He declined TV interviews. He skipped a tech convention in Vegas where he was supposed to be honored. When a popular science podcast begged for his story, he simply replied, I'd rather be in the hangar. Asterisk, but behind the scenes, he worked wonders. He proposed a new diagnostic system for engine anomalies based on acoustic resonance rather than code alerts. He designed a modular heat shielding system that reduced failure rates by 30%. He caught errors in simulations that had passed reviews. Eventually, engineers started coming to him with questions. The man once ignored for nearly a decade became a quiet oracle of insight. Asterisk, and yet, every Friday morning at 6 a.m. sharp, Darren still walked into the hangar with his old mop and bucket. He cleaned the floors before his meetings started. Asterisk, one morning, Marsh spotted him and asked, You don't have to do that anymore, you know? Asterisk, Darren nodded. I know, but that's where I started listening, where I started learning. The floor taught me how everything fits together. I like to keep my ear to the ground. Asterisk, Marsh laughed. You're going to make someone write a book about you. Asterisk, they probably will, Darren said with a quiet smile, but make sure they get the part right where nobody noticed me for 9 years. Asterisk, eventually, the story of Darren Cole became more than just an internal legend. Universities asked him to speak. Young engineers cited him as inspiration. Skytech's board even created a scholarship in his name for students who didn't follow a straight path, but who never stopped learning. Asterisk, Darren's story spread not because he was the smartest man in the room, but because he proved that greatness often hides in plain sight, that titles and degrees don't define your worth, that the hunger to grow is more powerful than the pride to be seen. Asterisk, and every time someone passed him in the hall and said, "You're the guy who fixed the engine," Darren would nod and say, "Yeah, but I was always the guy who knew how it worked."